only talked about design, public input, and construction. But where we are today and what Dylan Ward and Mark Simmons and Trace have been working on now for probably over a year, but also the sports committee has been a topic of conversation now for probably close to 3 years. And so what Dylan is going to present today is a proposed plan of how that sports complex will be operated. And as y'all are aware, in the past, the city has had agreements with the youth sports organizations, and we would fund them a small amount of money every year to maintain those facilities. I think what Dylan and his, with support from Mark and Trace, is there's a proposed new plan once this new complex has been completed. And I think what's important with this is the city has built a new sports complex in the last 25 years. However, this sports complex is much larger, and we have a very large investment in this facility. And we just want to make sure this facility is maintained to the level of expectations of the public, of the sporting groups that use them, as well as protecting our investment in this property. So, Dylan, with that being said, I'll turn it over to you. And
thanks, Buzzy. First off, I'll apologize. My voice is a little off. I had a little bit of sickness over the weekend, but I did test negative for COVID, so you don't have to worry about that. They told me I wasn't contagious, so happy to be here and talk to you all about this. Buzzy said for a year. Yeah, actually, we've been talking about this for probably a lot longer than that. So the sports complex has always kind of been the chicken and the egg issue. It's like, with the sports complex, the construction is one side of it, but you've got to have an organization in place or some sort of mechanism in place to operate it as well. So from day one, when we started talking about construction, we were also talking about operations. And as Buzzy said, this is likely going to turn out to be a $15 million plus facility by the end of phase one. That's not even like after future phases. That's just what we're talking about in phase one. And so we want to be sure we set that up for success. And so with that, I'll hop into my presentation. So as Buzzy mentioned, the primary purpose for today is to give you all an overview of the operations plan for the sports complex. My hope is for this presentation is to start out by giving you all a 10,000-foot view of the proposed operating plan and kind of what our thoughts are. We'll look at the proposed structure, the budget, and operating plan in its current proposed form. Then once we've given a general overview, because I'm going to go through some of these items pretty quick, there's a lot here, I'll be happy to stop at any point along the way, or if at the end, if there's specific issues you want to dig deeper into, feel free to let us know, because this is really just skimming the surface, so I don't keep you all night. This proposed plan represents, as Buzzy mentioned, years of planning by city staff, community partners, elected officials, and the like. Some of the members are here today, but I would like to take a moment to recognize Brian Bishop, Trace Stevens, Preston Herndon, Leo Peckinpah, former Mayor Austin, Buzzy Newman, Mark Simmons, and many others who have spent many hours helping to cast this vision for the new sports complex. During our conversations about the construction and the operations, we have visited the sports complex in Greenville in Muhlenberg County. We've also taken multiple trips there. We have visited the sports complex in Elizabethtown and picked their brains. And then Mark Simmons most recently has talked to Evansville, Owensboro, various other communities. And so we've tried to take, a holistic approach and look at this thing from a variety of angles. So, as I mentioned, ever since we first started talking about construction, we knew that we would need an operations plan. That being said, this is just a proposed plan, and it's subject to change based on your all's comments and other comments that we may receive down the road. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to stop me, but otherwise I'll get started with the framework. So under this proposal, and I should back up for just one second, Buzzy mentioned, he kind of talked about all the facilities. This plan pretty much is getting jump started with the new sports complex, and it can be expanded from there. But our hope is that we would start with a new sports complex. This would be the model, and if it works, then we can look at expansion in the future. So under this proposal, the new sports complex would become a new city division, just like the municipal pool in Atkinson Park. There are 3 primary parties who will be involved in this proposed operating plan. You'll have the city, then you'll have a new entity that's going to be called the Sports Advisory Board, or whatever we want to call it, and then you will have the recreational sports leagues or any other user of the facility. So first we'll talk about the city. So under this proposed model, the city would hire 2 additional permanent city employees to manage and maintain the new sports complex. One position, which we've been referring to as the sports complex manager, would be primarily responsible for administration, while the other, what we've been calling as a park facilities maintenance worker or something to that effect, they would be primarily responsible for maintenance, although many of the responsibilities at the sports complex would be shared between the 2 because you would only have 2 employees in that division. The latter position, the maintenance position, could also help with some of the facility issues that we're experiencing in some of our other park areas. I'm sure Trace can speak to, and Brian can speak to the vandalism and other things that we're always dealing with in the park. So the idea was that this person could have a little bit of carpentry or handyman experience beyond grounds maintenance, so that they could have their time maybe split, maybe not 50-50, but maybe 75-25 between the sports complex, and then assisting when they don't have as much to do there in the other park areas, repairing things like vandalized bathrooms, that sort of thing. So in addition to the 2 city employees, we're proposing that a new sports advisory board would also be created. And its purpose, broadly, is to support and promote the new sports complex, as well as other existing sports facilities that are owned by the city of Henderson. It would serve as an advisory board to the Board of Commissioners, similar to that of the Parks Board. It would be made up of a mix of board-appointed members, so members that you all would appoint to the board or the mayor would appoint to the board, as well as appointees from each major sports league in the community. And that will still take some defining, but that's kind of the general idea. And so we've actually been working, Mark and I, as we've been putting together this operations plan, we've actually drafted, and Don and I haven't even talked about this yet, so I apologize, Don, but we took the Code Enforcement Board ordinance and basically prepared a draft ordinance of the Parks Board just to outline the responsibilities. And so it's really not in final format, but it's more or less us trying to put some sort of framework to this and list out the responsibilities. So,
Dylan, can I stop you
yeah,
for a second?
go for it.
So is this just for the sports complex?
So for right now, it is.
Okay. So I think a way that you could define that a little better, maybe, is for each major sports league that is potentially serviced by the sports complex.
Yeah, and that
way we're not involving people who.
Yeah. So what we had. So to touch on that just a little bit, and this I hadn't really planned on talking about that too much here tonight, but the way I had phrased it in the ordinance was, as you enter into a new user agreement with the city, that is related to the new sports complex. So theoretically what would happen is, if we wanted to extend this to other entities, if they entered into a new user agreement with the city, then they would get a seat at the table.
Okay.
So we would kind of the city would control when to bring people onto that board, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So, but yeah, good question. And then the third party involved in the operation of the new sports complex would obviously be the recreational leagues or any other potential user who will actually use the facility for recreational purposes. And I say any other user, that's very broad. It could be nonprofit, for-profit, obviously recreational leagues, even a one-time use if someone wanted to come out and just rent the field for a day, that sort of thing. So, division of responsibility. So we just talked about there's 3 parties involved in the operation, so now I'm going to talk about the division of responsibilities. So as far as responsibilities go for the new sports complex, the city would be responsible for the facility budget, the employees, the day-to-day operations, the maintenance, the concessions, overseeing any user or rental agreements, and then the overall scheduling. Conversely, the recreational sports league or any other user would then specifically be responsible for operating their league or event. They would be responsible for their budget and scheduling within the time slots allotted to them by city staff at the new sports complex. So basically, the way this would work is the city would say, okay, like PCMA, for example, they're going to be moving out there. So we would say, okay, you all need these nights during these time slots. You all have the fields during those nights. We're not going to schedule your games during those slots, but we have it reserved for you for that 5 hours on that night. Outside of that, The city is free to let others use it, supposing that the field can withstand the use, and so that's where that comes into play. And then the final party, the Sports Advisory Board, would then help serve as the bridge or liaison between the city and the user of the facility. So it would also give an organized voice and some negotiating power to the local sports organizations. It would encourage a sense of cooperation between the two parties and promote growth in local sports through private-public partnerships. So the thought here is that if you have a group of organizations that have representatives on the Sports Advisory Board, they could kind of pool their resources together under this and petition the city for, this maybe, and this is more future, but this facility has a need for lights, so can we maybe get this taken care of this year? Or this is a hurdle that we're running in with operating our leagues. Is this something the city can help us with? So the way I view the Sports Advisory Board, once again, they're advisory, but they kind of act as the liaison between the city and the sports leagues to kind of be the voice for not just the sports leagues, but any user of the facility. And so in the ordinance, we actually list out some very specific responsibilities. And so some of the things that the Sports Advisory Board would also be responsible for would be fundraising. So as you all know, we're engaging in a naming rights campaign. And so the question has been, when that's over or those are up for renewal in 5 years, who's going to carry that banner onward? And so the Sports Advisory Board could be that person. They could also be engaged in hosting and attracting local tournaments, which would generate revenue for the city and even the recreational leagues or the users of the facility. They would also help with budget recommendations, so looking at what the facility needs and making recommendations to the commission or the sports manager. They could also be responsible for recommending a rental fee schedule, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but what that would look like. They could also create and maintain a website for the sports complex with our sponsors, collect public input, engage in long-term planning of new facilities or of future expansion at the new sports complex, and many other crucial responsibilities. So I know that's kind of like a really glazed over, fast description of that, but that's a very complex thing, and so we can definitely talk more about that towards the end of the presentation, or if you all have questions now, I can, but that's kind of a very brief overview of the Sports Advisory Board. So with this plan, there's several positives. One of the biggest pros of this proposal is that the city maintains control over scheduling. So for example, this means, as I mentioned earlier, that the city can give PCMA priority access to the baseball fields when they need them, and similarly, they can give youth football priority access to the football fields or the multipurpose fields when they need them. So now, with this proposal, the city becomes the gatekeeper for scheduling at the new sports complex, which would promote additional play and maximize its use for public in the community. Therefore, as I mentioned earlier, when the fields are not reserved for recreational league play, they may be rented or reserved by other parties based on a reservation policy that is established by the City of Henderson in consultation with the Sports Advisory Board. And so, as we've talked about with the artificial turf, if we go in that direction, this is especially true because at that point, it doesn't become an issue of wear and tear. It becomes an issue of, is it available? Because the turf can take, play from 8 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. at night on a Saturday if people want to use it that way. So, another positive of this plan is that it sets up the city for success in terms of maintenance. Buzzy alluded to it, and I alluded to it at the beginning as well. But this is going to be a $15 million plus project when we open up the gates, and it's important to have someone employed full time ensuring the proper upkeep and maintenance of this facility throughout the duration of its lifetime. We don't want this to be a part-time gig where this facility is only looked at part of the year, but we want this to be a full-time thing where we are ensuring that this facility lasts for the duration of its life cycle. Another positive about the Sports Advisory Board is that it can be created via ordinance and it doesn't have to have 501c3 status, which would take some time. But with the way it would be structured, donations could still be made out to the city and would therefore still be tax deductible. The way we're proposing this, it's a similar structure to what we did with Henderson Flash's fundraising when they made improvements at the Park Field facility. They did some fundraising, those donations came to the city, and we invested those back into the field. The Sports Advisory Board could also petition the city on behalf of the recreational sports leagues for capital requests at city-owned facilities and for operating assistance in their leagues if it's needed. and they could work together to present unique proposals to any hurdles met in the operation of their leagues. I keep hitting on that, but I think the Sports Advisory Board is really is going to be an arm that can get into those details. And if a league has a problem either with their league or the facility, they can come to the Sports Advisory Board. They can come up with a creative solution. They can bring that to the commission and say, hey, can we do something here to help resolve this issue we're having? The next positive that I think this plan offers is that it offers significant flexibility, most notably in one of two ways. So the first is maintenance. So under this proposal, the city may perform all the maintenance in-house. We can contract it all out, or the most likely approach being some combination of the two. So the way I would envision this going is, obviously, if we go with artificial turf infields, that's going to it should reduce the maintenance some, but it's going to change the type of maintenance. And so, we're still going to have to mow the infields, and there's going to be a lot of property outside the fences that is still within the public view that needs to be maintained. But even outside that, you've got these future areas that are going to be developed, however many years down the road. And so I envision it being some sort of arrangement where we have our own mower, we mow the field, the outfields, and maybe within so many feet of the fence, and then everything outside that we put on a contract mowing list. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the budget. So the second one, which I'm going to talk a little bit more on, is concessions. So there's several different ways that we could handle the concessions at the new sports complex. However, whatever route we take, I think it's important to keep in mind that the goal should be to generate additional revenue to help offset some of the operating costs. You see, at the municipal pool in Atkinson Park that we operate now, we hire all the cashiers as seasonal workers and buy all of the food product ourselves. Then any revenue generated goes back into the city coffers. However, at the new sports complex, the number of cashiers needed will be much higher because we'll start off with 2 concession stands, and then in future phases we could add as many as 2 to 3 more. And I think Mark can speak to this, and Trace as well, but in recent years it's been exceedingly difficult to find people to fill those positions. And so because of that, we're looking at recommending a little bit of a different approach. And so therefore, later this fall, we're proposing that before the new sports complex opens in the spring, that we issue a formal request for proposals for concession operations at the new sports complex. Part of the proposal would include a component where the operator either leases or pays the city a percentage of all the profit. We could review the proposals in the fall and go from there. So the thought here is that there's really no harm, no foul in putting out a proposal and just see what we get. The complex won't open until the spring. I mean, construction is supposed to be done in November. Knowing how things are going, it'll probably be early spring, and we wouldn't use it till spring anyway. And so the thought is we could put out an RFP, see what we get. Maybe it's a lease agreement, maybe it's something where there's a monthly payment. But the thought is that is a money generating avenue, and we want a part of that to help offset our operating costs. So once again, this plan allows for flexibility. We might try something at first that may not work the best. We can always try a different approach later, especially as it relates to concession stands. One other thing that I do want to note, in fairness to PCMA, is that currently at the existing facility, PCMA runs, and I'm sure you all know, but PCMA is the name of the recreational youth league who runs the baseball at the existing facility. So right now they run the concessions out there, and they get to keep all the revenue generated. And so in our conversations with them, as well as other local recreational leagues, we've been told that they need that concession revenue to help offset the maintenance costs in order to keep their leagues running. Because right now, at most of our facilities, they're responsible for all the expenses and all the revenue. They take care of the maintenance costs, they take care of the concession costs, but they also get the revenues from that. But since the city is taking care of all the maintenance costs at this new sports complex, that's why we're kind of peeling back the concessions and thinking, we're going to take care of that and see if that can help offset our operating costs. And the hope is that by doing so, PCMA would still be able to break even. But I have a little note here that just says, if it's determined after we get into this that they actually needed some of that to offset their league costs, I think they could show you all a balance statement or a profit and loss statement, and I think that's where the Sports Advisory Board could once again get involved and say, hey, let's figure something out. So
you could do a combo.
Exactly.
And they supply the labor and get a certain percentage of
exactly.
profits,
And I know they have got the pork chop sandwiches, and so one thing we had talked about was, well, you buy the pork chop sandwich, and we haven't talked to PCMA about this, but we've talked internally, is, they buy the sandwiches, and you sell them, and they get the profit from them. So I think the Sports Advisory Board can be that negotiator. All right, so that's a lot, but that's the structure. The next part of my presentation is the budget, but I was going to pause and let y'all let y'all kind of digest that for a minute.
I was just going to. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to suggest that we pause. That's
Yeah.
why I made the hand gesture. So.
Yeah.
You haven't talked about it, and you said you used the code enforcement board?
I just used it like the actual document itself. Most of the stuff in there was not used. Like the content was not used. It was just the formatting.
Because there is a statute
On what?
on boards that oversee these, so that, I didn't know if that you had included
KRS.
that in
Yeah.
there.
You said there's a what?
Statute.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get with you on it. We were. I wasn't really intending to write it, but as we were getting into it, and I was trying to actually like verbalize what the sports advisory board was doing, it was helpful. So yeah, I've been meaning to send that to you for a few weeks now, but the idea would be is if the board likes that idea, then I would start talking with you and show you, and then we could start actually putting it together. So.
I like what Commissioner Thomas said, is that if we start out with a model that looks like whoever is going to be using the field supplies the labor for the concessions, and then we offer them a certain percentage of the concessions, and we keep a certain percentage of the concessions, I think that's probably a really good place to start. And then we can amend from there, because that sounds like a model that could work. It would allow them to funnel money back into the league. It would also give us some money to maintain the fields, and it would supply the labor that we don't have to. So I think that was a really good suggestion.
That surprise you?
No, did I say it surprised me? I know I acted surprised. I didn't know if I said it out loud.
How many people were you thinking about being on this board?
So when it first started, I think, I was going to have like 3 to 5 at-large, and this is all subject to change, obviously, but I think it was going to be like 3 to 5 at-large appointments made by the commission, and then as the way we had it written was as you signed a new user agreement with the city, then you would get a seat on the table. And we have to define a little bit, what the criteria, because you don't want just like a for-profit getting, so there's going to have to be like you're going to have to be a nonprofit operating in Henderson, operating sports, or some sort of effect to that. And that's where we're still trying to figure out a little bit, but.
And the statute is actually pretty specific on
Well, that's pretty good
terms
then.
of office and how many people can be on that board.
Well, that's good.
Well, that'll define that, yeah.
Yeah. Because we just, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
For example, we don't have lacrosse in Henderson, but if we do in the future,
Mhm.
our multi-use fields were designed for lacrosse as well. So they could become a new user of the facility, which at that point in time, they could get a seat at the table.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll just say, and I think most of you are probably pretty aware of this, but there's been kind of a history in Henderson of, as you explained earlier, leasing out the fields to a particular league. That league does all the maintenance, and as a result of that, they have kind of been very territorial, and they won't let anyone else use the fields. So kind of this new model that we're talking about is just a way to kind of work around that, make sure the fields get maintained, and make sure we get the most use out of the land that's available to all the public as much as possible. And I think that's the goal, and I think it's a good goal for the city to pursue that.
Yeah, I think everybody should have access to it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to be in a league. I mean,
Right.
if you rent the field or schedule a time. Now, on rentals, we still have to have practice time for all these teams.
Yeah, so we'll get into that pretty extensively in the budget. I've got a section I'm going to talk about it. Yeah, I think there's a range of things you can do, and I'm going to give you all a couple examples of things that I've seen other communities do firsthand and get your thoughts. But yeah, I mean, we'll definitely hit on that here in a minute.
And to echo the two of them, this is now the 4th commission that I've been a part of that has discussed the sports complex. And the most consistent thing that I've heard over all those commissions was exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
We really want to get away from the model that locks these fields up to one organization and make sure that they're as open as they can be to the public and
Yeah.
in the best public interest.
I wasn't even gonna say it, but you said it.
Yeah.
You did a great job.
Yeah.
That's definitely what we attempted to do. So I'm glad that it sound, this is our attempt at that. So,
Sounds great. Yeah.
any other questions before we go into the budget? All right, well, we'll go ahead and get into the budget. And so that's really the packet that I handed you all. That's really what all that is numbers. And I want to thank Robert and Buzzy for helping me put this together, and Roseanne as well. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time, but I'll just go through this. So, with the sports complex, we discussed it this morning, and a new division would be created in the budget for the sports complex. It would be Division 455. And in conversation with Robert this morning, we may even end up making it its own fund in order to better track the expenses and various sources of revenue, because there's going to be a lot of money out and a lot of money in through different sources. So that's a potential. That's not a guarantee, but potentially. And so before I get into the details of the budget, I do want to make a few general comments, just disclaimers about the proposed budget, that some of which relate to what I just talked about. So first, this budget obviously is proposed, subject to change. It's our best guess at what we think the expenses will be. Really, as Robert and I have talked, we're not going to know what the real expenses or revenues of this thing will be, for the first couple years at least. And so this proposed budget is set up based on the structure that we described for the last few minutes. So with this budget, as I mentioned, there will be both a revenue side as well as an expense side. However, in the budget that you all see before you, we didn't include any projected revenues in order to be conservative, also because there was just no way for us to really know how to put a number on that. But as I'll get to here in a minute, there are multiple ways that the sports complex can generate revenue. So another assumption we made is that in this budget, we didn't include any expenses nor revenue for concessions. So concessions, you will notice, is not included in this budget. Now, the reason for that is because, in theory, concessions should more than pay for itself. And so whatever route we take with concessions, it should have a net positive impact on the overall sports complex operating budget. So regardless of what we do with it, it should just improve that number. And so we decided it was best just to take out all expenses. Yes, sir.
Can I make a suggestion on concessions?
Yes.
Let's look at a POS system
Okay.
where we can take credit cards,
Yes.
and then you eliminate the cash and you eliminate the theft. Yeah.
We actually talked about that yesterday or Friday. That's what Greenville does. Greenville has a system like that, because we were talking about security, and there's
There's plenty of theft.
no matter which route you go on
Plenty of opportunities.
no matter which route you go on concessions, there's some hurdles to be had. But definitely that's a good
I
comment.
hate to say it, but earlier on when you were talking about bidding it out, that's the first thing I thought of. Well, somebody's going to come in and bid it, and then they're going to,
Mhm.
Well, the thought would be is that if we went that route, and Robert and I talked about it, sorry, I don't mean to, but we would probably just have them pay a monthly payment, and that way we wouldn't have to know, how, like, when you start getting into monitoring, we want 15% of your profit. That gets difficult, or more difficult. Whereas if we had a guaranteed $3,000 a month payment or something, that's if we did that was
Yeah,
probably the route.
But
we
they
would
could
go.
also gouge everybody by charging.
Exactly. Yeah.
$10, $12 a sandwich.
Exactly.
Instead of 4 or 5.
Yeah. So it's
which that's another thought process for the city to have appointees on that board, is that we maintain some indirect control over
Yes, I
pricing
agree with
and
that,
stuff
yes.
like
Yeah,
that.
we gotta make it affordable.
Yeah, and I will say, just reiterate, that's a great point, but it also is still an advisory board. So at the end of the day, they're going to be making recommendations to you all. So like they can make a recommended fee schedule, but kind of like with the bridges. I think when we first did that project, they had to propose to you all what they were going to charge, and so it would be probably something along those lines. It's a little different, but kind of that same thought. Okay, so concessions aren't included, but hopefully that would just help the number on there. Okay, the next thing is there will also be an annual operating budget as well as a front-loaded capital budget in order to get the sports complex up and running in its first year. Also, I just want to reiterate that the city's budget will only include those items related to the facility itself. So all revenue and expenses related to running the actual leagues or individual events themselves will still be managed by the leagues or the individual user. The city will not be responsible for any of the recreational leagues' budget. So we're not coming in and taking over the recreational leagues. And so just to give you all a clear picture of what that means, so city expenses, it would include field maintenance, mowing, repairs, seeding, striping, paying electricity, that sort of thing. Like for PCMA, their expenses would be things like buying the kids' uniforms, umpire fees, purchasing baseballs, those sort of things. So very, very distinct, boundary between the league and the facility costs.
About tournaments.
Tournaments? Yeah, so with tournaments, that's where. So the way I would envision tournaments getting to, and you're asking a lot of good questions. 'Cause I was going to talk about that with field rentals as well. But the way I
we move on.
okay, well, I'll make sure I touch on that though when we get to it because I do want to talk about it with field rentals. All right, so unless there's any questions, I'll hop into the first year capital budget, which is the first sheet, well, the second sheet of your all's packet. All right. All right, so the capital budget. So the proposed capital budget for the first year, as you can see there, is, and I guess I can follow on here, is $143,200. Y'all probably won't be able to see this, but. So I'm just going to go down through these really quick, and if y'all have any questions, feel free to let me know. But so utility vehicle, so that would be obviously like a gator for various things, seating, could be used. I think we put a little extra money in there so it could double as a plow during the winter time, so it would have an extra, parks would have an extra vehicle to do that. We've got a mower, so as I mentioned earlier, that's a zero-turn mower. We'll still be doing some of the mowing, at least ourselves. The outfields and the multi-purpose fields will still require more regular mowing than what we would have on our annual mowing contract. The 14,200, or I skipped ice maker. So ice maker 6,000. That would be probably near the concession stand, and that would be used in the kitchen, but it would also be used for injuries, that sort of thing. Kitchen appliances. This is one I want to talk about for a second. Depending on what route we go with concessions, that could go away. If we were to just lease out that space, they may end up supplying those. But if we're going to do something where we're involved directly, we would purchase those. So that is really the only concessions-related expense that is included in this budget, and that would be hopefully a one-time purchase. That includes things like a hot dog roller, a fridge, a popcorn maker. Mark, what else does it include? Nachos, just various concession stands. Appliances.
Are we looking at grilling outside?
So that would be up, yes, but it would once again be up to the model of
Okay.
whatever we do. But I would say so, yes.
But the grill inside, you gotta have a hood system.
Yeah.
That will make it a whole lot more than that.
I don't think the construction, we do not have a hood in our concession. I'm pretty sure, Buzzy, right? Yeah. Then let's see. So Wi-Fi and security cameras. So this is to put in the Wi-Fi, the internet infrastructure throughout the complex, as well as some security cameras around the site. We've got lightning protection, speaker system. So this is something that I know there's been some debate on in the past with the local residents, but we went ahead and put in an allowance for that. So a PA system, basically, for the complex. We've also got safety netting there, and basically what this is on one side of the complex, Mayor, this was actually a comment you had made to us. There is parking is fairly close to the outfield, as it is in a lot of places, and so we threw in some money there to put up some safety netting. Should that become an issue, or should we just want to go ahead and do it just to be, I think most people when they go to a ball field, they know if they park right next to the outfield fence, they're taking a risk. But if we can mitigate that risk, I think we would be happy to do that. And then the last thing is an artificial turf field broom. So I guess it would be, Buzzy, do you want me to say anything about what we found out about the? Yeah. And Mark, I might have you come up here if you don't mind, but I'm going to give you all an update about. And Ryan, I see that you're here as well. So we did do a little bit of research on the artificial turf question. But before I turn it over to Mark, we included actually if we end up going with artificial turf in the contract, they provide us. I guess you need a broom and a sweep, and I'm not really sure what the difference is, but you need both of them. And the contract would provide us with one of those, and so we've got a price here included to furnish the other one. And so we have done a little bit of research since we last talked, and the artificial turf issue was brought up. And so, Mark, I don't know if do you mind giving just a couple
Sure.
comments about what you learned?
Yeah, I talked to the supplier of the artificial turf, and they said that they do not have the PFAS really in theirs. They use they're using the coconut husk, so that cuts back on that and any kind of runoff that it would be. They said it's not a concern of theirs of anything anymore.
Yeah, they actually sent us a formal letter
Yeah.
that said something like they had dealt with this issue like it's been several
It's
years
been
ago.
years
And
that
it's
they've
been
done
brought up like dozens of times, and so they sent us a certified letter that basically said they're the only one, I think, manufactured in the USA
Yes.
or something that can certify. I can send you all a copy of the letter, but it was I was very pleased when I saw the letter.
Yes,
So
absolutely. They showed, the guy was saying like, look, we've dealt with this in the past, and we do have a certified letter that says that we do not contribute to that. It is if you were to go through one of the other companies that gets theirs through China or something like that, then you run the risk of that. Theirs is 100% made in the United States, and they are very concerned with that issue. So they do have a letter that says that they are certified.
yeah, in the letter, I think, or in his email, he did mention that the reason a lot of that artificial turf comes back positive for PFAS is because of the location it's processed. So in a lot of these places, it's processed in, I think, in carpet
Yes.
factories. And he said they control, since it's made in the USA, they control every step of the process, the manufacturing process, and so there is no cross contamination that they've ever been aware of. So that's one benefit, I guess. So, but we're happy to share that with you all if that's something you like. But while we were talking about, thanks, Mark. I want to be sure to provide you all an update because we talked about that at our last work session. So.
Going back to the speaker system, Dylan?
Yes.
Do we have anything in place, or what have we considered in terms of noise and light mitigation?
So we've got a tree buffer, which is, it will help, but besides that, Buzzy, I don't know if there's any other things that we've talked about that we can do, or.
The light pollution, and I would like to say night friendly, but these are ball field lights,
Yeah.
and they, part of the contract to install the lights will be aiming, so the light pollution will hit the fields only and not disperse out like it would in a parking lot.
And one other good thing, too, that I should mention is, so we're only proposing lighting on the 4, and I don't have a map pulled up, but like if you can imagine the site is, it's like triangular, and on the far right is Bent Creek neighborhood. Well, on that far right is where the 2 multi-purpose fields are going. Well, there's 3. The first one is farthest on the left, and the 2 on the right we're not proposing lighting on. So the closest, a soccer field's a couple hundred feet wide, so the closest 500 feet's not even going to have lighting on that. I mean, there might be a little bit of parking lot lighting, low-level lighting, but as Buzzy said, I mean, LED lighting has come a long way and it's directional, so that should help. And I think we're running electric. We're gonna run empty conduits out there for future lighting, but I don't know that those fields will ever get lit. Those 2 extra multi-purpose fields.
And the downlighting for the parking lot is what we call sky friendly, and that's part of what we do with anybody putting in parking lot lighting in our city. So.
Gotcha. Thank you. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure we were considering that up front before, like if we're putting in a tree barrier or whatever.
Yep.
Hopefully we can get on that and plant them so that they'll be effective and, effective enough in time for when it opens, and we don't have to deal with it for a few seasons before it becomes helpful.
Yep. Any other questions about the capital budget? If not, then we can go to the operating budget, which is the green pages. So this one's pretty short. The projected annual operating budget for the first fiscal year is $331,000 and some change. Of this, $204,000 approximately is personnel costs. It includes some contract mowing and an artificial turf maintenance agreement. Mark, in conversations with the artificial turf supplier, for something like $3,000 a year, you can enter into an agreement with them where they'll basically come in once a year and fix any, maybe not major things, but do like preventative maintenance type things with the turf. And so you can look through there, and if there's any questions, feel free to ask me. But I will be honest, this was our best guess for the first year. Just looking down through here, obviously personnel cost is the big one, coming in right under $204,000, and that reflects the 2 positions we talked about earlier, the sports complex manager and the one kind of facilities maintenance worker. Looking down through there. Probably the next biggest thing, electric purchase, 24,000. You'll see there. That's also an estimate, but this is unfortunately not in Hempel territory. It's in Kennergy, so we have to pay for the electricity out there. Good thing about that is everything out there will be LED, high efficiency, so that'll hopefully reduce that cost. Contractual services at 20,000. That is for the mowing and the artificial turf maintenance contract that I mentioned. And then at the very bottom, you'll see that the total sports complex is 4,748.90. That's because that is the 303, or that's the 331 annual operating budget added to the capital budget, which is that 143.2 on that bottom line. So, hopefully at least for the next several years, that capital budget would be very small. And so that 331 would be closer to what hopefully, if we're accurate, would be closer to what your annual operating cost would be. Buzzy, Robert, do either of you all have anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. Any questions from the board about the operating budget or any specific item? There's also, the pink sheet is a detail sheet that kind of just lists out some of the items that, the numbers on here match the numbers on the green, and so, for some of the bigger numbers, we tried to list out what it was, but, like I said, the vast majority of it's personnel costs. Okay, if there's not any questions about that, then the last part of my presentation before I turn it over to you all for conversation, discussion, questions is potential revenue sources, and this is where we'll get into the field rental questions. And so even though we're not showing any revenue projections in the current budget, I did want to at least mention some of the potential revenue streams for the city at the new sports complex. And I know, Ryan, you had texted me about some other some planning things, and so I still need to get with you on that. But so some of the most basic ones, we've already talked about concessions. So obviously, whatever that looks like, hopefully that provides revenue in some form or fashion at a net profit to us. Another thing that this actually was mentioned by our friends over the water utility, food truck parking. So we could, for tournaments or whatever, we could charge to have food trucks, rent a space for the day, or as long as that's allowed in our ordinance and all that. So that's another way we can generate revenue. Another one that we've already talked about a few times, naming rights. That's still something that's in the works that could continue on throughout the life cycle of this sports complex. Field banners, which kind of relates to naming rights, but selling the field banners for the fencing, that's also something where, maybe we partner with the leagues and the leagues help go out and sell those, and maybe we have some sort of cost share with those to get those on the field. So I think, once again, that's where the Sports Advisory Board can come in, petition the commission and say, hey, we want to do this. Are you okay with it? Let's do a cost share. Because ultimately, I can't go out and sell banners. Buzzy can't, because we can't sell to companies because that's a conflict of interest, and not that we probably could anyway. But so the leagues, if they need that money to help, with their operational costs of their leagues, that helps drive that and becomes another public-private partnership. So, and then field rentals. So this is one I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So under the plan that we're kind of proposing, all users of the new sports complex would enter into a new user agreement with the city of Henderson in order to be able to use the fields. So Mark Simmons has done a great job getting me like half a dozen to a dozen rental policies, reservation policies, agreements, all these things from all these different communities all across the nation. And I've been kind of taking bits and pieces of what I like from different ones, and I'm going to try to come up with some sort of agreement. Because it's going to be different depending on, the type of entity using it. You're going to have a couple different agreements. Obviously, the one that we make with PCMA is going to be different than if you want to rent a field for your son's birthday party or something like that. There's going to be some differences. But in terms of types of users for this sports complex, the way I see it, there's really two ends to the spectrum. And Rodney, this gets into, or Commissioner Thomas, I apologize. This gets into some of your comments. So the way I look at it is, on one end of the spectrum, you have nonprofit organizations like PCMA who are providing a service to our community, to our youth. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have these for-profit organizations who would use the fields to host tournaments specifically for the goal of making a profit. But then you've got everybody else in the middle who might not be an official nonprofit, but they're not trying to make a profit either. And so our suggestion, as we've been talking through this, would be to keep the facility free for all nonprofit organizations, but to establish some sort of rental fee or reservation policy. And everybody would have to reserve the field, so let me be clear about that. But you would establish some sort of rental fee schedule for anyone explicitly using the complex to turn a profit. So if someone came to the city and said, hey, I'm going to host a 16-team tournament and I want to do it this weekend, we would have a rate that says, okay, the field's $500 a day, and the city would collect that. And then tournament directors, they might collect a gate fee or different things like that, and that's how they would make their money. And we could once again partner with the leagues in that. That's where the sports advisory board comes in. I tried not to drill too much into the details on those because I don't know everything that the sports leagues need, and I can't predict everything that's going to happen with this. And so really I keep going back to I want the sports advisory board to be in the trenches, working with the leagues, working with the city, come up with a proposal, bring it to the city, and then let you all give it your stamp of approval. And so I mentioned that free for nonprofits, rental fees for for-profits. But for everyone else in the middle, I think city staff, in conjunction with the sports advisory board, could propose a policy and/or fee schedule to the Board of Commissioners for approval at a later date. And so I just want to pause there for a second and give you all a couple examples of what I mean. So as you all know, last year I spent several months in Cincinnati with my son, and while I was up there, I got really involved in the sports community. And one cool thing that they had in Cincinnati was in the recent years they had artificially turfed all of their school fields. And so up there, they also had organized leagues where you had to pay, you had to pay like $100 to be in this league. And for those, they paid a rental fee for those fields. But any other time they weren't reserved, they were open to the public. Public could go out there and use it if it was during the set hours where that field was available. The gates were open, you could go out and use it. So there were multiple times where I'd go out and play pickup soccer in an outfield of an artificially turfed infield baseball field, or go play on an artificial turf high school football field. And so that's kind of one option. But there's also the recognition that if I'm not a nonprofit and I just want to have a game, but I want to go out and play, but I want to do it during hours when it's not normally staffed, there's a cost to the city. So there is a wide range of possible scenarios between the for-profit and the non-for-profit. And so I just mentioned that to say, I would love to hear your all's feedback on that, but I don't think that's something we need to decide right now. I think that's something that we can talk more about and figure out as a sports complex gets up and running. But I just want to mention that because I think that ultimately it's up to you all what kind of access you all want to provide to that. Obviously, you want it to be free for certain people and you want to charge others, but it's those people in the middle and those situations in the middle. What do you do with those? And I think that's where the sports advisory board works with the sports leagues, works with the community, works with city staff to present to you all a proposal that you all could consider at a later date. And once again, going back to the policies that Mark Simmons was kind enough to get for me, those are all different and they all have different policies. So we can pull from those, and I could even give you a list of 4 or 5 options to pick from. So that's basically it for my presentation. I think I covered hopefully everything that you all would have liked me to touch on, but I'm happy to answer any questions, discuss any topics that you all might want to hear more about. I guess Mark, Trace, you all have anything you'd like to add? Anything I missed? Robert, Buzzy?
Did a great job.
Yeah, I got one more revenue source. I don't know anything about this, but I heard about it. Somewhere in Lexington, they had Wi-Fi cameras where you could watch your kids play.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
You could zoom in, and you paid a fee, say $10 to watch this game. So if Dad's somewhere out of town, he could watch his son play.
What a great idea.
And he said the cameras were inexpensive and covered every field, and it was just another
Yeah.
revenue source. The grandparents could watch their kids play every game.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Because we have talked about that a little bit, the live
So you know
streaming.
about it?
Well,
I
so
just heard about it.
what we had been told is that, and now everybody now it's like you can live stream from your phone. So what we had been told is a lot of times now what they do is the team will have something and they'll stream it. But for those teams that don't, we can definitely explore that. I've got a note here to look into that more. So
I think the other important thing, Dylan, is to discuss your cooperation and coordination with Henderson Municipal Power and Light on their new fiber to home plan of them participating with installing high-speed internet service to the complex.
yeah, I've not talked to them directly, but I don't think Greg's in here. And if he's out there, Greg, you can step in. But he's been talking with Hempel, and he's told me that I don't know where they're to now, but that they have expressed interest of moving out there. And so I think the pricing that we included in that Wi-Fi was for their rate. But those numbers, like I said, that number in particular is one that I'm not quite so sure about because there's a lot of what ifs there. But yeah, it would. Our hope and our plan is to get Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi at the site. At least for most of the areas. In addition to obviously the internet that we will need tied back to the city for the offices for the people who will be working out there, city staff. So, and then the security cameras, obviously the security cameras I think will have to be networked too. So, and we can maybe make those in conjunction with something like that. So.
I think what's key on live streaming is having the capacity to do it. And if y'all remember, Hempel is proposing, I think, 1 gigabit, whereas most of us now at home have 300 megabits. So it's good to know that we'll have the infrastructure in place to do that.
Yeah, let's just do it right, whatever we do.
Yep. Good deal. Very good job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or anything while Dylan's here? I think it sounds like you're heading in the right direction. I know you put in a lot of work over the years.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to see where we are. And I'm actually happy. You're never really happy when you want to open something a little earlier than what it's scheduled to open. But I think by opening next spring, it gives us even more time
Yeah.
to make sure that we have our ducks in a row. And so I just, the only ask that I have is that we use that time to get our ducks in a row. And make sure that whatever questions we have unanswered, we continue to answer, and that we work really hard on being good neighbors to Bent Creek out there too.
And the banners, I think those banners will provide a little sound barrier once they go up around all the fences. It helps.
Yeah. Good deal. Any other topics for discussion? I think we're good to go. With that, we will entertain a motion to adjourn this work session. We got a motion for Commissioner Bowles. We have a second.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Thomas. All in favor, aye. Aye. Meeting's adjourned.